Yasuri Shichika is considered to be the strongest swordsman alive, but ironically, he has never touched a sword in his life. Apparently, he has spent his entire life living on a desolate island with his sister Nanami. Their father, Yasuri Mutsue, had created a very unique and powerful sword style that doesn't use swords at all. So before Mutsue died, he ensured that he taught it to Shichika, which made his body alone become a weapon of mass destruction. One day, Shichika sets out to fetch some water, but on his way there, he runs into a strategist named Togame. She has come to the island in search of Shichika's father for a mission. But once she discovers that he is dead, she tells Shichika that he would have to take up the responsibility since he is now the head of the Yasuri family and also the 7th master of Kyotoryu. After this, she goes back to their house and informs Shichika of a talented swordsmith known as Shikazaki who crafted 1,000 swords with only 12 being of remarkable strength, while the remaining 988 were made just for the sake of practice. Due to the immense power the swords had, the 9th shogun of Katanagatari known as Shogun Kyu has sent out several of his armies to gather these swords, but they had all been wiped out with a single attack. So Togame has conveyed the command of gathering the last 12 swords that the legendary Shikazaki had crafted. She has been assigned to Shichika by the shogun as his strategist to guide him along his path. Just then, Nanami senses several kunai being launched in their direction, so she rushes to push them out of danger. Shichika is now pissed off at the fact that his father's home has just been attacked, so he springs into action and is now face to face with the ninja who attacked them. This ninja named Maniwa also possesses one of the 12 unique swords known as Nizeto Kana, which makes him confident that he will easily be able to beat Shichika. Maniwa draws the sword from his mouth and then starts to attack, but Shichika uses his Kyudaru sword style to dodge the attack and even attempts to break the sword in half, but fails to do so because the sword is just too strong. Togame then arrives in an ungraceful manner to warn Shichika not to cause any damage to the weapon because it is far too valuable. Maniwa hears this and ingests the sword back, indicating that he isn't ready for a serious fight. After this, he causes a distraction by launching several kunai at Shichika, while he gets away with Togame, who is currently unconscious. A few minutes later, he ties her up to a tree but doesn't plan on killing her. Rather, he wants to kill Shichika, so he shape-shifts to match Togame's body so that he can impersonate her. While Shichika is busy searching for Togame, Maniwa pretends to be her and runs out in distress towards him. But surprisingly, Shichika has kicked him straight in the stomach, causing his sword to fall out of his mouth. Apparently, Shichika didn't even know that Maniwa was disguised, so he just attacks him as an act of reflex. Now that his true identity has been revealed, Maniwa starts to inform Shichika of Togame's backstory and true motive. At this point in the story, we learn that Togame is the daughter of the leader of the last rebellion known as Hida Takahito, who was killed by Shichika's father a couple of years ago. Ever since that day, she has aimed for power so she can avenge her family's death. She was even so desperate to gather the swords that she came to ask her enemy's son for assistance. After this, Maniwa assumes Shichika's form and challenges him to one final duel. But since the people of Kyudaru aren't good swordsmen, Maniwa can't handle his sword properly, so Shichika easily defeats him. He then goes on to untie Togame from the tree, who is surprised to see him because she believed that he would have been defeated by Maniwa. Following this, Shichika has a bright smile on his face while he tells Togame that he has agreed to help her gather the 12 swords, not because of monetary gain, but simply because he has fallen in love with her. After Nanami is made aware of Shichika's escapade, he leaves his sister on the island and sails off in a boat with Togame, with the aim of obtaining the other 11 swords. A little while later, they arrive in a large city, and while they are there, Shichika finds it difficult to remember Togame's face since he has been isolated for such a long time. So after they both change clothes, Togame has Shichika sniff and lick her body so he can remember her smell and taste. During this time, she informs him that their next destination will be an abbey, where they can obtain the Zanto Nakamura, which is so sharp that it can cut through the strongest sword made by Shikazaki. Togame's major reason for choosing to obtain the Nakamura first is because their opponent is a swordsman who goes by the name Oneri Ginkaku. So the next day, she and Shichika walk through the abandoned desert so they can arrive at their destination as quickly as possible. During this time, Togame wishes to document the peak moments of their journey and someday publish it as a book. So judging from the battle that Shichika had with Maniwa, she realizes that he has a very weak personality. So she suggests that he adopts a catchphrase to appear more interesting for her book. They both continue to walk until Togame trips over a dead body, causing her to fall down to the ground. At the same time, a giant castle appears out of thin air, but in reality, it is just camouflaged by the mirage in the air, meaning that you can't see it unless you get that close. Seemingly, this dead body that Togame tripped over belonged to one of the 12 heads of the Maniwa Corp known as Shirasagi. since the 12 Maniwa Corp leaders are currently in a race to attain all the 12 swords crafted by Shikizaki. Togame presumes that Shirasagi learned that Unari Ginkaku had obtained the Nakamura sword, so he ended up getting killed in an attempt to take it from him. Shichika hears this and starts to get a bit nervous because this means that his opponent is very strong, but Togame is instead excited because their battle will finally be getting some good material for her book. After this, they both go into the castle to find Unari Ginkaku sitting alone in a dark room. Togame doesn't want this to be a hostile interaction, so she starts by striking up a negotiation with him to exchange the Nakamura sword for anything he desires. Judging by the look on Ginkaku's face, he doesn't seem moved by Togame's offer, so after a little more conversation, he urges her to get closer to the room so that she would be within the range to kill her with his sword. Then in the split second that he grabs his sword, Shichika senses danger, so he kicks her out of the doorway. She lands on the floor and notices that the top layer of her shirt has been ripped, meaning that Ginkaku was so fast that they couldn't even see him move. At the same time, Ginkaku is impressed for Shichika's ability because this is the first time that one of his attacks has been dodged. Ginkaku can tell that Shichika is starting to feel confident because he managed to block his attack. So to make things clear, Ginkaku informs Shichika that the true speed of his sword is even much faster than the speed of light. Shichika tells Ginkaku to hold on because he wants to confirm something, so he closes the door while telling him that they would soon be back. In the next few minutes, they both go and sit outside, where Shichika explains that he didn't have any reason for coming out here, but just wanted to see if Ginkaku would let them leave freely. Togame was attacked the moment she crossed the boundary into the room, so looking at it the other way, he concludes that Ginkaku wouldn't attack them as long as they entered the room. Going into that room is now considered to be a dead zone, so they know that the only solution would be for them to find a way to get him out of the room. Meanwhile, Ginkaku is still thinking about Shichika and the fact that he is a descendant of the Kyotori family. He believes that their sword style is no match for him, so he believes that Shichika would be an easy target for him. Shortly after, he reopens the door and informs Ginkaku that he has figured out a counter to his sword attack. After this is said, he goes down and assumes a runner pose, which confuses Togame because she thinks that he is making his attack direction very obvious. Ginkaku also sees this obvious pose and is now certain that Shichika is not a worthy opponent for him. With no time to waste, Shichika dashes straight into the room, so Ginkaku draws his sword in expectation of an easy win. But surprisingly, Shichika dodges his attack and then follows it up by kicking him in the face. Togame sees this and starts to get excited because she thinks that Ginkaku has been killed. On normal grounds, that attack is intended to have killed Ginkaku, but Shichika had intentionally held his strength back, so that attack didn't end up killing him, but rather only hurting him. Ginkaku is impressed at the fact that he has been able to land a blow on him. To end things quickly, he gets up from the ground and decides to use all his energy, which would cause his blade to move at the speed of light. At first, Ginkaku makes use of his 5 lives technique, which launches 5 different attacks at the same time, so it wouldn't matter if Shichika slows down or speeds up while attacking him. On top of that, he also used his blade to make a cut on his left arm, causing his blood to flow into the sheath and soak the sword. Because of that, there is now friction between the sheath and the sword, and therefore making him to reach the speed of light. Since a lot of blood flows out of his arm at once, Togame suggests that she and Shichika make a tactical retreat and just wait for Ginkaku to bleed to death, but Shichika wants to fight him because he feels a true battle would be a more satisfying victory for him. In the next moment, Shichika dashes into the room and successfully dodges Ginkaku's 10-strike attack by jumping back and kicking Togame in the face. He then jumps onto the ceiling to deliver a clean overhead kick because he knows that Ginkaku can't draw his sword from above. Upon Shichika's victory, the Nakamura sword has been collected by Togame, who is still pissed at Shichika by kicking her in the face during the battle. 3 months into their journey to gather all the swords, they arrived at the Izumo region to obtain the next sword, which is the Sento Tsurui. They walk until arriving at a 1,000-step staircase, which Togame finds very tiring to climb, so she has Shichika carry her all the way to the top. On getting there, they run into the head of the shrine known as Tsuruga-Meisai, who has a menacing look on her face. She takes them into the temple, and Shichika cannot believe that she is actually the head of the shrine because the head of the temple is rumored to be a former bandit, but Meisai looks nothing of that sort to him. So to make things clearer, she explains to him that she stopped being a bandit more than 7 years ago and also adopted a new lifestyle ever since she became the head of the shrine. With all the formalities out of the way, Togame asks to speak with Meisai in private while she tells Shichika to wait for her outside. Now as they move over to the other room, they both share a bottle of sake, while Togame goes straight to the point and tells Meisai that she has come here to acquire the Sento Tsurugi sword to maintain public peace and order. They talk for a while, and Meisai is surprised to hear that Togame has been able to obtain 2 of Shikizaki's perfected blades because this was something that General Q wasn't able to accomplish. During their conversation, Togame mentions that the boy she came with is the 7th generation Kyutoryu head, which Meisai finds interesting, so she also lets Togame know that she belongs to the Sentoryu clan. These statements make Meisai start to wonder who exactly would win if she were to go head-to-head against Shichika. Furthermore, since Togame is aware that Meisai's city of Izumo has become a desolate wasteland, she offers to have Izumo, as well as the Sanzu Shrine, be given proper care by the shogunate, which would only be done if Meisai hands the Sento sword over to her. Meisai acknowledges that this is a good offer. However, she still tells Togame that she would only hand over the sword if she is to adhere to some conditions of hers. Later that night, Togame informs Shichika that Meisai is only willing to hand the Sento over if Togame can find the first blade of Sento Tsuragi, which is going to be quite hard because it means she'll have to look through 1,000 identical swords, all without Shichika's help. The second condition is that Shichika has to beat her in a one-on-one battle, so if all of that is done, then they would be free to take the perfected Sento blade. The next morning, Togame sets out to inspect the swords for the originals, so she tells Shichika to remain in the house so he doesn't cause any trouble. Later that day, Togame is busy trying to identify the swords, and then all of a sudden, she gets attacked by one of the maidens with a sword. But right before she can get hit, Meisai steps in front of her and blocks it. After this, the maiden breaks down in tears because she now regrets what she has done. In the evening, another one of the 12 heads of the Maniwa Corp gets off a boat and heads straight for the Sanzu Shrine because he received intel that 2 of the perfected Shikizaki swords are being held there. As Shichika sits outside, Meisai walks over to invite him inside to have a drink with her. As they talk, Meisai tries to persuade Shichika to not help Togame take the Sento sword away by telling him the sad backstories of the little maidens in the shrine. However, Shichika doesn't care about the people of the shrine, but rather only cares about what Togame tells him to do, which is to obtain all the swords including the Sento. The conversation shifts to the topic of death, where Meisai mentions that she had killed at least 43 people before she became the head of the shrine, whereas it's revealed that Shichika has only ever killed 3 people, including his father. Then all of a sudden, the Maniwa Corp guy known as Kuizami appears at the gate and tells Shichika and Meisai that he has simply come to retrieve the 2 Shikizaki crafted swords that they possess. Kuizami remains confident that his chained sword style alone would be enough to defeat them both, so he gives off an arrogant laugh every couple of seconds. Shichika attempts to fight Kuizami, but Meisai runs past and tells him that she has it under control. She then goes on to kill Kuizami with a single slash of her sword, which in turn impresses Shichika. The next day at noon, Meisai and Shichika are about to have a face-off, which would determine whether they will return with the Sento sword or not. Shortly after, the battle begins and Meisai strangely starts to run away from Shichika, leading him into a forest filled with several swords. This is her Sentoryu sword style at work. She also feels that she has fully trapped him, so she has confidence that she has won the battle. Rather than taking things any further, she asks Shichika to admit his defeat, but just then, he manages to run out of the forest just as Meisai is distracted, leading them back to the shrine where they can now fight fair and square. Meisai knows that she has blundered, but she still has one more trick up her sleeve, so she digs into the ground and picks up the original Sento sword and uses it to fight Shichika. The fate of the match is quickly decided as Shichika uses his palm to strike her heart, which ends up killing her. So with this being resolved, this dynamic duo has obtained the Sento blade, leaving 9 more to go. After 1 month goes by, Togame finds out who the wielder of the next Shikizaki blade is, which is known as the Hakuto Hari. Sabi Hakuhei is known to be the one who wields the sword, but aside from that, he is popularly recognized as the strongest swordsman in all of Japan. Sabi has sent them a letter, challenging Shichika to a duel to determine whether he would go home with his sword or not. Shichika hears the content of the letter and finds it quite strange because Sabi is known to be a very old-fashioned and straight guy, and yet he still chooses to previously betray both her and the shogun, just because he desires the power of the sword. Togame sees where Shichika's point is heading, so she explains to him that it's not all that strange considering the fact that he was touched by the poison of Shikizaki's sword. Sabi was a man who lost most of his humanity after devoting way too much of himself towards swordsmanship, although that devotion was worth it for him because he's reputed for being able to cut the Moomin cleanly in half. Initially, Togame wanted to cancel the fight between him and Shichika because she feared that Shichika would be no match for him. However, the situation has escalated, so she has no choice but to accept Sabi's challenge and let Shichika face him. Meanwhile, 3 other heads of the Maniwa Corp are seen heading for Shichika's home island because their current objective is to defeat him and take the swords. On reaching the island, they instantly recall that Shichika has an elder sister, who he left behind on the island, so they figure that it would be best to take her hostage to draw Shichika to them. Kamakiri, who is the leader of this squad, decides to be the one to abduct Nanami. He believes that this would be an easy task because he doesn't think that she has undergone any training. However, he doesn't also want to get so arrogant because she still has Kyotoryu blood running through her veins. Before he goes, he leaves his red crystal behind as a warning to the others in case anything is to go wrong. A couple minutes later, he spots Nanami picking some herbs. Judging by the innocent look she has on her face, he thinks of her to be an easy target, so he rushes towards her without any hesitation. However, Nanami easily counters his attack by using her martial arts skills. Shortly after, Kamakiri wakes up being tied to a tree in front of the grave that Shichika had carved for his comrade Komori. Nanami shows him this grave and lets him know that she would be doing him the favor of burying him next to his comrade. But before that, she wishes to torture him a little as a way of teaching him a lesson for thinking that he'd be able to kidnap her. Because more Maniwa Corp heads have been sent to target Shichika, Nanami can easily tell that this means that Shichika's hunt for the swords is progressing quite well. Following this, Nanami asks Kamakiri how many others have come with him to the island to kidnap her, to which he replies saying that he's the only one. Nanami can tell that he's lying about it, so she picks up his claws and uses them to stab him. At the moment this happens, the red crystal he left over with his comrades shatters, leaving them to believe that he has been killed. The yellow comrade named Mitsubachi wants to avenge Kamakiri's death by facing Nanami, but Chow Chow, his other comrade, wants to be the one to avenge him. So after a little talk, Mitsubachi lets Chow Chow take the lead. A couple of minutes later, Chow Chow runs into Nanami, who informs him that she has killed his comrade Kamakiri. Chow Chow is annoyed by this, so he lets her know that he is going to do his best to kill her. Nanami hears this but doesn't get intimidated because she believes that she will emerge on top no matter the situation. So with no time to waste, Chow Chow charges at her with murderous intent, but she uses her Kyotoryu technique to dodge it easily, and then follows it up with a forehand strike, which she is certain to kill. To her surprise, Chow Chow jumps away from her attack with a move so swift that it looks abnormal. His swift movements are a result of his sword style known as Ninpo. Chow Chow's sword style allows him to ignore gravity, meaning that he can hold any object no matter how heavy it is. Nanami acknowledges that this is an impressive technique, but what she finds most impressive is the amount of time that he must have spent learning it. Nanami says that she is jealous that the people around her often put so much effort into learning a new ability, whereas she doesn't have to struggle at all for it and learns it instantly. Apparently, she does all this because she wants to know what it feels like to actually put effort into something. Chow Chow doesn't understand what she means by this, so he continues his attack in hopes of finishing her off. But as he jumps into the air, he immediately loses sight of Nanami, and in the next moment, she appears right behind him and uses her Kyotoryu technique to punch a hole into his stomach, thereby killing him. As Chow Chow's life fades away, he remains in disbelief at how she had learned his Ninpo technique so quickly, which allowed her to jump up behind him. After this is done, Mitsubashi watches Nanami for a while and starts to think that she has an illness because she is seen coughing. He believes that this is the right time for him to strike, so he comes out of hiding and uses one of his poisonous caltrops on her. Then as she lays against a tree, Mitsubashi forgets about the kidnapping mission and just wishes to avenge his comrade, so he picks his sword up and slashes it in her direction in an attempt to kill her. However, Nanami has disappeared by the time the sword connects, and all of a sudden, she uses his sword style against him and shoots a poisonous caltrop, causing him to fall down and start to die slowly. Meanwhile, Shichika successfully defeated Sabi to obtain the Hakoto Hari sword, and at the same time, his victory has now earned him the title of the strongest swordsman in Japan. At this point in the story, we come across Princess Hite, who has a long-lasting rivalry with Togame for some reason. Princess Hite is told by her informant that she has partnered up with Shichika, who is the 7th generation head of the Kyotoryu. Following this, the princess is shocked to find out that she and Shichika have been able to gather 4 of Kimizaki's perfected 12 blades, which is something that General Q was incapable of doing. At the same time, Princess Hide also learns that Shichika had defeated all these guys without sustaining a single scratch. This is because his sword style is mainly focused on defense rather than offense. The princess guesses that their next destination would be the city of Setsuma, where they would find the Zokuro Yoroi sword. This particular sword boasts of immeasurable defensive power, so she is curious to find out how Shichika's defensive sword style would hold up against a highly defensive sword, such as the Zokuro Yoroi. Meanwhile, the duo arrives in Setsuma and is seen at a fight event going on between a regular swordsman and a giant swordsman in thick armor known as Azakura. The fate of the match is quickly decided as the armored swordsman defeats the other guy by giving him a strong physical collision, which ends up breaking his sword. Shichika observes this and thinks that it's the unique sword that has just been broken, But to his surprise, Togame informs him that the Zakuro Yoroi isn't a physical sword, but rather actually the armor he's putting on. After this battle is over, Togame tells Shichika that they should find a place to spend the night so she can explain the details of how they'll be obtaining the sword. That night, the duo are seen enjoying themselves in a popular hot spring, which is known to have strong healing properties. However, Shichika isn't able to verify that because he hasn't sustained any injuries up until that point. As they both continue to rest in the bath, Togame acknowledges that they have come a long way by being able to claim 4 Shikazaki's 12 perfected blades. So with that, she tells Shichika that they don't need to be in a rush anymore because the best strategy would be for them to gather the rest slowly yet efficiently. On getting back to their room, Togame reminds Shichika that he is expected to defeat Asakura without causing any damage to the sword, so to achieve this, she has devised 2 ideas that are certain to work. The first one is to push Asakura into the ocean, causing him to die by drowning. Then after that, it would bring him out of the water and claim the Zakuto sword. Since the armor is purely metal, the other idea is to find a way to heat it so much that it burns Asakura to death. Just then, Asakura unexpectedly shows up at their inn and first of all, tells Togame he's aware that they both are here to take the Zakuto armor away from him. Since Shichika is now considered the strongest swordsman in Japan, Asakura simply challenges him to a duel, to which Togame would claim the sword if Shichika wins. Togame has not yet heard what Asakura will receive if he wins, but before asking him, she has already assumed that he will want to take away the 4 swords that he claimed up to this point. But surprisingly, if Shichika loses, Asakura wants Togame to belong completely him because apparently he is in love with her. The next morning, they are paid a visit by Ho, the leader of the Maniwa bird squad, who is considered to be even stronger than the previous Maniwa. At first, Togame doesn't want to listen to a word he has to say, so Ho cuts off his left hand to get her attention and let her know that he means business. Now that Togame is ready to listen, he goes on to state that his main reason for coming here is to establish a temporary alliance between them both while finding the swords. The Maniwa Corp is fine with only attaining 2 or 3 of the swords, so Ho has come to set a truce between them to ensure that things continue to run smoothly. Togame thinks about this for a few seconds and understands that there would be an instant battle right there if she were to refuse. Also, even if the Maniwa Corp can obtain any of the swords, all that would be left is for her and Shichika to go and steal them back. So with all this in mind, she agrees to the terms and the alliance has been formed. A couple of hours later, Shichika and Asakura are in the arena and ready for the battle to commence. Before Shichika got out, Togame asked Shichika to try his best to win without killing Asakura, which he finds to be quite strange because she has never made that sort of request before. Shortly after, the battle commences and Shichika decides to end this all in a single blow by using his armor-piercing technique, but unfortunately, he tries it, and it doesn't seem to have any effect. Shichika is shocked by this, so he starts to try other Kyotoryu techniques, but it all seems to be to no avail. At this point, he is pretty much ready to give up because none of the attacks seem to be doing any damage, but before he gets the chance to, Togame calls out to him from the audience and gives some motivation while telling him not to lose. Togame's words of encouragement lift Shichika's spirits, enabling him to block Asakura's strongest attack, after which he uses his brute strength to pick him up and throw him to the ground, which is enough to incapacitate Asakura, thereby making Shichika the winner. This victory marks another sword being claimed by the duo, which leaves about 8 more to go. On their next escapade, the duo are seen passing through an icy tundra called the Izo region to acquire the next sword, which is called the Sato Kanazuchi. Then as they walk through the thick snow, Shichika suddenly gets frostbite, causing him to fall to the ground and go unconscious, leaving Togame stranded with no idea what to do. But before they both freeze to death, a cute little girl with freakish strength picks them both up and carries them out of there. Meanwhile, the leftover 6 heads of the Maniwa Corp are having a meeting to address and conclude what their next move is going to be. These heads of the Maniwa Corp go by the names of Ho, Umagame, Oshidori, Kawauso, Penyin, and Kyoken. Since they are all aware of the alliance formed with Togame, they acknowledge that their main focus is to gather the swords in the other locations while avoiding Togame and Shichika. Ho suggests that they head over to Shirazen to collect the sword over there. However, before it's agreed upon, Penyin speaks up to inform them all that there is no longer a sword in the city of Shirazen. She is unaware of who it was, but apparently someone had laid waste to Shirazen in about half an hour and ended up taking the sword. Ho acknowledges that this may be a serious threat, so he assigns Kyoken the task of handling it, but as this happens, they all realize that Kyoken has disappeared. Kawauso assumes that she has gone to attack Togame and Shichika in an attempt to avenge their comrades that they had killed. In the next scene, Kyoken jumps into the air and vows to slaughter Togame and Shichika for killing her comrades. Back at the icy tundra, Shichika and Togame have been saved by a little girl named Koneyuki, who takes them into a cave and also lights up a fire so they can get warm and cozy. After a few introductions, Togame finds out that Kanayuki belongs to the exact clan that is holding the Soto Kanazuchi sword. So with this in mind, Togame asks Kanayuki to kindly take them to her village clan the next morning. Kanayuki hears this and has a sad look on her face because her entire clan had been wiped out by an avalanche last month, with her being the only survivor. Togame asks Kanayuki whether she is familiar with the sword Kanazuchi, but she replies saying she has never heard of it. However, she soon recalls that the mayor's eldest son did make use of a unique sword while he was hunting, so she just presumes that it has to be the Kanazuchi. Since the clan was wiped out in an avalanche, their entire village is covered in thick snow, so Kanayuki offers to go and retrieve it, while she tells Togame and Shichika to wait for her in the cave. Shichika is shocked to hear that Kanayuki is going to get it for them, but even with that, he is a bit skeptical of whether she is just going to give it to them like that. A couple of hours later, while they both are sleeping in a hammock, Kanayuki returns with the Kanazuchi sword in hand, which shocks them both. She hands it over to Shichika, who drops it immediately because it's way too heavy for him to handle. After all, the Kanazuchi is the heaviest sword that Shikazaki made. The fact that she can carry and swing this sword around so easily makes Shichika aware of just how strong Kanayuki is. Following this, she also mentions that as accustomed to her clan, she can't just let them leave with the Kanazuchi, so they would have to prove themselves worthy of it. So the next day, he and Kanayuki are set in the ice rink for their battle to commence. Shockingly, Kanayuki easily overpowers Shichika throughout the entire battle with her brute force, which starts to make him question his life choices up until that point. Kanayuki then swings Kanazuchi at him, which hits his arm directly, causing it to break. Thus, in the fight with Kanayuki, Shichika suffered his first ever defeat along their sword collection journey. Meanwhile, Kyoken is slowly approaching Mountain Midori, which is where Shichika and Togame are, so she can get her revenge. Her comrades don't want to jeopardize the alliance that has been formed with Togame, so they chase after her in the hope that they will be able to stop her from attacking Togame. Outwardly, Kyoken is a being who died a very long time ago, but using her special ninpo technique, she can possess people's bodies to use them however she likes and for as long as she wants. However, one of the constraints of the technique is that she can only possess female bodies. Back in the cave, Kanayuki offers Shichika some rabbit jerky while apologizing for fracturing his arm, and after she does that, she heads out to hunt for some more rabbits. Once she leaves, Togame draws Shichika's attention and tells him that she thinks Kanayuki was lying to them about having to prove themselves before taking the Kanazuchi. Togame feels this way because she suspects that Kanayuki lied so that they would be forced to spend more time with her so she wouldn't be lonely. In the middle of the night, Kyoken breaks into the cave, but Kanayuki is there to stop by using her brute strength. A few moments later, Kyoken discovers that Kanayuki had defeated Shichika in the past, so Kyoken uses her ninpo technique to take over her body. Kyoken possesses this new body and finds a lot of strength in it, so with that, she is fairly certain that she will be able to defeat Shichika. Their battle begins, and Shichika immediately notices that he is now able to read all of Kyoken's movements, unlike when he faced Kanayuki. This is because Kyoken is an experienced assassin, whereas Kanayuki is a bare amateur, which makes her movements close to unpredictable. Shortly after, Shichika uses one of his techniques to strike Kyoken's shoulders, making her go unconscious almost instantly. Then all of a sudden, Kyoken's ninpo marks appear to be disappearing, which means that Kanayuki would soon be restored back to her body. Togame observes this entire scene and is impressed, so she commends Shichika for being able to defeat his opponent without killing her. Togame then looks back to see Ho and Kawa Uso, and on seeing them, she immediately thinks that they are here to attack as well, but no action is taken. Ho makes it clear that they had come here to stop Kyoken. Togame isn't entirely convinced by this explanation, so she gets angry and calls off the truce. Ho senses Togame's anger, so he kills Kawa Uso and makes Togame acknowledge it as a form of apology for all of this. Togame sees that Ho has just killed his comrade, so she gets even angrier than before, but still decides to accept his apology because she fears that he may do something even crazier. Now before he leaves, he informs Togame that the unique sword that was in the city of Shirazen has been taken, which can only mean that there is someone else trying to gather the swords. At this part of the story, it's revealed that Nanami has been an abnormally strong freak of nature ever since she was born. This was the main reason why her father chose Shichika to become the next head of the Kyotoryu clan, even though he was younger than her. Nanami's abnormality was so severe that her parents even wished death upon her while she was a child, but she just refused to die no matter the circumstance. Seemingly, Nanami was the one who invaded the Shirazen Empire to steal the Shikazaki-crafted sword, all while slaughtering the entire population in the process. This news is quickly made aware to Togame, so a couple of days later, Shichika stands opposite his sister Nanami because they are about to have a duel to determine who would keep the sword. Nanami doesn't even have any interest in keeping the sword, but she's rather doing all this to give Shichika a reason to fight her, so she can measure whether he has grown to become stronger than her over the past 6 months he has been gone. Their battle begins, and Nanami effortlessly dodges all of Shichika's attacks with so much ease that she even has time to talk to him mid-fight. Togami spectates the fight and acknowledges that Nanami would most likely defeat Shichika because she has the hidden technique known as Migeka. This hidden technique houses the incredible skill to learn any technique as her own after just seeing it once. She was even able to learn the Kyotoryu techniques without any training, simply by watching. During the battle, Nanami showcases some freakish strength, which confuses Shichika because he knows that she is naturally very weak and thin in her arms. Nanami clears their confusion by explaining that she was the one who wiped out Koneyuki's entire village, and during that process she inherited the freakish strength of an Izora elder. During their conversation, Nanami starts to feel that Shichika has grown softer than he used to be, and she believes that it's all thanks to Togami. Since Shichika had used his signature move on her once, she had easily picked it up and noticed that it had a weakness that all his opponents failed to see. She considers all the opponents he faced up until this point to be utter weaklings compared to her, so she tells Shichika to be thankful that they didn't notice the flaw in his technique. So to end the battle, Nanami uses a special Kyotoryu technique, which strikes Shichika 272 times, causing him to fall to the ground. Both Shichika and Togami are in utter disbelief, because they wonder how she has been able to pull off a heavy move like that with such a fragile body. So to make things clear, Nanami takes her top off and reveals the Akuto Bita blade, which is stabbed right in her chest. This is the proper way for this blade to be used, with the lightning-charged dagger embedded in her chest. Her body's weaknesses are forcibly healed. With this blade, Nanami now has no weak or blind spots whatsoever, so now that she has defeated Shichika, she is deemed the strongest in all of Japan. Ever since that day, Shichika has been so depressed that he refuses to come out of his room at all. Meanwhile, Togami has a chat with Nanami, trying to convince her to hand over the Akuto Bita without a duel, but she refuses to do so because she is upset at the fact that her brother has gotten soft, so she wants him to prove himself by winning her in a duel. So with this being said, Togami rushes to Shichika's room and snaps him out of his depressive move. Then after she gives him a motivational talk, Shichika agrees to have a rematch with Nanami, which Togami is happy to hear. So she then informs him of the scheme she has cooked up to help ensure his victory. She takes him to the next room where she starts to explain the major flaw in his signature technique. He spends the next few days working on the right combination of techniques that has the least amount of flaws. 720 combination attempts later, he has finally attained the most efficient combination. However, he remains unsure of whether he will be able to win or not. That evening, he and Nanami are set to have their final battle. Shichika finds a sudden confidence in himself, so he tells Nanami that he's going to be taking care of her once and for all. However, Nanami doesn't think that he's strong enough. Just as the match starts, all the candles go off, which renders Nanami's eye copying useless, thereby allowing Shichika to land his perfected technique on her. He then retrieves the sword from her chest and throws it over to Togami, thinking that Nanami has been killed. Then all of a sudden, she gets up from the ground with a wide hole in her chest. As Nanami approaches Shichika with a thirst for battle, Togami calls out to her and says it's over because they have already taken the blade, so they don't have any actual reason to fight. Nanami then launches a ranged attack at Togami, which almost kills her but only ends up cutting her hair short. Shichika sees this and instantly gets furious because he has vowed to protect Togami no matter the cost. Togami's hair catches on fire, which causes him and Nanami to be in a cinematic ring of fire while they have their final battle, but this time Shichika is going all out. After a little back and forth, Shichika uses his optimized technique to finally put his sister out of her misery, leaving him scarred for the rest of his life. Although he's sad about his sister's death, he finds some accomplishment in it because he knows that she wants to be killed by him. Then the next day, he and Nanami hop on a boat and head back to the shogun's home city of Owari. On getting to the city of Owari, Togami takes Shichika to her house and tells him to stay there while she goes over to the castle to make a few arrangements. He stays alone in Togami's empty house for a while and starts to get bored, so he decides to make the best use of his time by doing some training. Then all of a sudden, Princess Hite's servant, Amanza Hieman, interrupts his training session by walking in behind him and calling out to him. Amanza Hieman has come here to inform him that the princess wishes to pass some information to him and Togami about Shikizaki's blades, so he and Togami are expected to come and see her later. About an hour later, they both have a meeting with Princess Hite, who immediately makes fun of her new hairstyle the moment she sees her. Upon this little reunion that they have, they spend the initial stage bickering over some very insignificant things, all while Shichika sits back to watch it all. Once things have calmed down, Princess Hide tells Togami that the information she has to deliver isn't about Shikizaki's blades, but rather about Shikizaki himself. Togame is now very surprised to find out that Shikizaki allegedly has a workshop in the area of Lake Foyo. However, there is a being known as Byarugo who is believed to have been protecting this workshop this entire time. Togame thinks about this and realizes that the princess isn't lying because she recalled that Maniwa formerly mentioned that one of the sword locations was in Lake Foyo as well. So with this in mind, Togame decides to head over there to see what's going on. However, before they leave, the princess suggests that they have her servant tag along to guide them along the way. So with the help of Amonzahayman, they both are led to the area of Lake Foyo, and on getting there, Amonzahayman has completed his task, so he takes his leave. Togame and Shichika observe Lake Foyo to be a desolate water body with what looks like the remains of an old ship scattered everywhere. They explore the area for a bit until they spot Byarugo patrolling the empty lake, so they decide to hide from it in the meantime. After a little while, Togame acknowledges that if they are to find Shikizaki's workshop, it would help them a lot to gather the remaining swords, meaning that they'll have to defeat Byarugo in order to get there. But to come up with a plan for that, Togame needs to get more information about Byarugo, so she signals Shichika to go and babble her for the sake of insight. Shichika launches an attack at Byarugo, which is easily countered and even almost inflicts damage on Shichika. Byarugo's swiftness and strength doesn't seem to be regular, which brings them both to the conclusion that Byarugo is actually one of Shikizaki's swords known as Bido Kanzashi. Meanwhile, Maniwa has ordered Maniwa Unigami to go and retrieve the sword, which is located in Shinano. But on his way there, he runs into Amonzahayman, who has come to stop him from retrieving the sword located in Shinano. These two quickly start to fight, and Omigami is able to prove his strength by breaking Amonzahayman's sword with a single attack. After this, Amonzahayman starts to take this fight seriously by using his special technique to move quickly around him and then kills him in the ending moment. On the fourth day of their studying Byarugo in Shinano, Togame finally decides to take action to defeat it, so she has Shichika dig up a hole, which is said to be a trap for Byarugo to fall in. But to their surprise, Byarugo is easily able to evade this trap rather than falling into it as Togame had expected, and after which, Byarugo strangely stands at a point to sunbathe. Later that night, Togame has prepared a detailed blueprint of Byarugo's movements, which she tells Shichika to study so that he would be able to successfully attack it tomorrow. Then the next day, Shichika starts to battle Byarugo, and thanks to the blueprint Togame laid out for him, he is easily able to dodge all of her attacks. In the ending moments, he delivers the final blow, which defeats Byarugo and allows them to claim their next sword. Meanwhile, Princess Hide has been informed that Shichika and Togame have defeated and claimed Byarugo, but even after that, they have stayed back at Lake Foyo in hopes that they can locate Shikizaki's workshop. At the same time, Princess Hide has just given Amonzahayman the instruction to kill Maniwa. Following that, Togame has just defeated a Shikizaki sword holder in a game of Shagi, so as promised, the wielder named Kikuchi would have to battle Shichika with her blade Oto no Kogiri on the line. A few moments later, they are ready for battle in the dojo, but Kikuchi notices that Shichika does not make use of any weapons or armor, so that she refuses to fight him because it dishonors her clan to attack someone who isn't armed. To satisfy her, Shichika arms himself with a sword and armor, but surprisingly, this causes him to become much slower and weaker, allowing Kikuchi to defeat him with ease. In the evening, Shichika still doesn't understand how he became so weak after just using a sword and armor. However, he also commends Kikuchi for her swordsmanship skills, and even goes on to say that she may be the best opponent that he has faced so far. Although Togame doesn't like the fact that he is praising her, she also cannot deny the fact that Kikuchi possesses a very refined technique. Just then, Kikuchi walks in and says that she considers Shichika to be a weakling and also doesn't consider him a worthy opponent. Kikuchi suggests that Shichika studies real sword combat at the Shino Iso school under her direct tutelage, and after he has completed his training, he will come back and face her in fair fight. During this time, the remainder of the Maniwa Court has discovered the location of another one of Shikizaki's deviant blades. The sword is known as Dokudo Meki, which is seen to be trapped inside a block of stone. Because of this environment, its ominous aura was kept from leaking outside, which is the typical behavior of the Shikizaki crafted blades. Before they make any sudden moves, Maniwa warns Oshidara not to touch the sword with her hands or else the outcome may be fatal. At the same time at the dojo, Shichika heads over to the training room the next morning to start his training with Kikuchi, but before he leaves, he notices that Togame isn't following him, so he asks her to come, but she simply declines while saying that she has more important things to do. Shortly after, Shichika arrives at the training room, where he is shocked to see that there are no other students apart from him. Apparently, Kikuchi's classes are so intense and strict that she ends up driving all her students away, leaving Shichika to be her only pupil. Notwithstanding, Shichika greets Kiguchi and his training starts with him using a rag to clean the entire training room. Togame gets a feeling that he may be a bit lonely during his first training session, so she hurries over to the training room to surprise him with her presence. She gets there and sees Shichika and Kiguchi in a kissing position. She instantly gets jealous and runs away, when in reality, Kiguchi is just helping him get rid of a bug in his hair. Shichika spends the remainder of the day with some sword training, but he appears to be terrible at it, so he doesn't make any significant progress for today. He goes back home later that evening and Togame gives him the cold shoulder because she isn't happy with what she saw when she went to the training room. Over the next couple of days, Shichika and Kiguchi accidentally end up in romantic situations when Togame comes to check on him. This causes her to slowly believe that something is going on between them both. Now on the 10th day after training, Shichika and Kiguchi have a deep conversation about the Odo sword being handed over. Although Kiguchi is aware that handing it over to Togame is the best thing to do, she still can't help but try to keep it for her own selfish interests. Seeing that the Odo sword has been a part of her clan for several years, Kiguchi considers it to represent both the dojo and her identity. Ever since she succeeded the Odo sword from her grandfather, she noticed that she had become a more morally upright person. And come to think of it, she recalls that her grandfather also mentioned that he felt like he was reborn when he first took up the Odo sword himself. Now putting all this aside, Kiguchi reminds him that they need to continue their training, but before that, she gives him some information about the training swords. Although they are just training swords, it is still capable of damaging vital organs with a single strike, which is why armor needs to be worn while sparring. Now the Maniwa are about to depart with Dokudo Meki, but before they can get out of there, Emonzaiman comes to stop them. He was ordered to come and kill Maniwa Ho, but since he was able to escape, Emonzaiman is faced with Maniwa Oshigara, who he finds to be a formidable opponent in battle. Oshidara uses her technique to overpower Emonzaiman in every way, which leaves him with no other choice than to use a crafted gun to kill her. As she lies on the ground and awaits death, Emonzaiman commends her abilities for sticking to the traditional ninja norms. Now in the dojo, Togame confesses her jealousy to Shichika concerning what she has seen with Kiguchi for the past week. At first, Shichika is confused by this, but he later understands what she means by this, so he explains that it's just a bit of a misunderstanding. Now that Togame has been given an explanation, the mood starts to get romantic, which later ends with her and Shichika sharing a kiss. The next day, it's time for the battle between Shichika and Kiguchi to go down. But before that, she and Togame play a shogi for best of 9, which Togame ends up winning 4-5. Now during the real battle, Togame starts to put her scheme into action, which is predicting Kiguchi's moves before she even makes them. This causes her to freeze and not make any moves, which allows Shichika to land a head strike on her, making him the winner of the battle. With this victory, the duo has attained Kiguchi's blade, making this the 9th addition to their collection. Their next destination would be Togame's birthplace, which is also where Sato Hakare blade resides. A couple of days later, they both arrive at Togame's hometown only to discover that it has been burnt down to ashes. But despite the area's terrible state, the wielder of the Sato Haraku known as Higaki Rine is rumored to be in the area, although he is nowhere to be found. Just as Shichika suggests they search the nearby towns for him, the little girl appears out of thin air and is introduced to be Higaki Rine. His current form is quite confusing, so he transforms to his normal body and goes on to greet Togame. Without any argument, he agrees to hand over the Sato Harakiara. However, before they are free to take the blade, Rine lays some conditions for them. The sword is buried about 30 meters below where Togame is standing, so the main condition for this is that she has to be the one who digs it up without any help from Shichika. So the next morning, Togame prepares to start digging the ground, which surprises Shichika because he expects her to have come up with a scheme that would get her the Sato Haraki without actually digging up the hole. Although Togame understands what he means, she still decides to dig it up as told because she doesn't want to have an interaction with Rine. And after this is said, she heads over to the fields to start the digging. Ever since Rine had appeared them, Shichika noticed that she had been acting weird, but he remained unsure of what to do about it. Then all of a sudden, Rine appears and transports him to a fantasy world with lots of flowers and green life surrounding them. During their conversation, it was revealed that Rine had received the Sato Haraku as a gift from Shikizaki himself. However, Rine doesn't have any use for it, and he also doesn't want to throw it away, so he decided to bury it underground. Across this period, Rine has taken the form of the little girl again. Shichika takes a close look at him and finds the body to be quite familiar. Rine finds this to be understandable, so he explains to Shichika that whatever form he sees him is a projection of his memories. This form that Rine has taken is a complete embodiment of Konayuki, Kikuchi, Nanami, and Tsuragi. These are all the people who have defeated him in battle since he began the sword hunt, so he may be holding some bad blood along with it, causing Rine to assume that form. Shichika, Looking at his memories, simply recognizes the parts of himself that he doesn't want to face. People often change their memories to suit what they're most comfortable with, so in Shichika's case, he lets him know that he's going to have to face the darkness that he always avoids. Simultaneously, the once mighty 12 heads of the Maniwa Corps have been reduced to only 2 members, which are Ho and Pengen. Ho was still in possession of the Dokudo Meki, so along their journey, he decides to head for the town of Ashu to handle some business. However, they are still unsure of when and whether Emonzaiman will make an appearance. He believes that if they succeed at the negotiations with the strategist and manage to get all of Shikizaki's deviant blades, then they will be retiring from duty, meaning that he's going to entrust the future of the clan to the next generation. Back in the Fantasyland, Rina forces Shichika to face his treacherous memories, allowing him to understand that the curse of the Kyotoryu is that they, as a sword, cannot make use of a sword, which explains why he became weaker while using a sword against Kiguchi. Once this is done, it's now time for Shichika to go. But before he leaves, Rina informs him that his current appearance is a projection of his memories, whereas his arrogant personality is a projection of Togame's personality. Later that night, he asks Togame about it, so she explains that the arrogant behavior is a projection of her father's behavior. It now makes sense to Togame, because her father was the first person who came to her mind when she came there. Emonzaiman goes back to report to Princess Hite that the Dokudo Meki is now in the hands of Maniwa Ho. The princess hears this and is uncertain of whether this would result in catastrophe or misfortune. Emonzaiman says that if Togame and Shichika end up being able to get the Dokudo Meki from Maniwa Ho, then the 12 unique Shikizaki blades would be assembled, hence making her desire complete. Even though this is Princess Hite's true desire, she doesn't want anyone to know about it, so she tells him not to speak of it ever again. The next day, Shichika decides to fight Rinne with the hope that he would help him face his past, even though that's not a valid reason to fight him. However, Rinne himself doesn't have a problem with it, so he also agrees to fight with him. The fight starts with Rinne unexpectedly dodging every single attack thrown by Shichika. What he finds even stranger is that even though Rinne was the one to make the first move, he isn't making any offensive attacks but rather only focusing on defense. Apparently, Rinne is much weaker than Shichika, but since he's channeling all his strength into defense, he can easily dodge the attacks. Rinne is doing this because he doesn't actually want to fight him, but rather wants him to realize that his troubling memories are mainly because of the people he has killed in the past and also because he doesn't know his reason for fighting. Through the help of some flashbacks, he finally realizes that he's fighting for Togame, and if not for her, he wouldn't have any reason to fight. This realization helps him to break out of this fantasy world and rush over to Togame, who is lying unconscious in the hole she's been digging. She has been able to find the Seito Haraku, so she presents it to Rinne while telling him that she is going to be taking it. Rinne has no problem with giving it out, so he agrees to hand it over since Togame has adhered to his conditions. They continue to have a conversation about Shikizaki's unique swords, where Rinne mentions that each member of the Kyotoryu clan is one of the special Shikizaki deviant blades. Then once all the information has been passed, the duo take their leave and are ready for their next escapade. As they are seen walking out of the town, they run into Pengen of the Maniwa Corp, who is lying on the floor because he has sustained a sword wound. Pengen speaks up and tells them both that he doesn't care what happens to himself, but they both should save Maniwa Ho. To explain how this happened last night, he and Maniwa Ho were on their way to the next city until they were stopped by Emonzaiman, who had come to kill them. During their battle, Emonzaiman started to slowly overpower Ho, so Pengen threw the Dokudo Meki sword as a last resort. Unexpectedly, Maniwa Ho absorbed the power of the sword and got possessed by it, so rather than focusing on his target, he turned back to Pengen and slashed him across the chest. Shichika and Togame find him lying on the floor the next morning, so they change their initial plans of travel to head for a nearby inn that can treat Pengen. Shortly after, they arrive at the inn and Shichika starts to wonder why Maniwa Ho would want to attack him in the first place. At first, Togame is also a bit confused about this, but she later realizes that it may be the effects of the Dokudo Meki sword possessing Maniwa Ho, causing him to harm his comrade. Several days later, Pengen doesn't seem to be making any significant healing progress, so they both just decide to leave him there and continue their journey. But before they leave, Shichika thinks it would be a good idea for them to just kill him now since he's their enemy, but Togame doesn't like the idea of killing for no reason, so she tells Shichika it would be best if they just left him there since they don't have a valid reason to kill him. So putting that aside, they now head for the new Maniwa village. Princess Hide has closely been monitoring their movements, meaning that she's aware of their journey to the new Maniwa village. Although she wants them to gather the swords, she believes that this would be the end of the road for them because the sword wielder in the village is a very strong ancestor of hers, whose power is so immense that it wasn't even passed down to her. So it's either Togame dies or the sword's collection ends, which is considered to be a win-win situation for her anyways. Along their journey, Togame acknowledges that if they manage to collect this incoming sword, then the sword collection journey will be over. Shichika hears this and thinks that she may be getting a little ahead of herself because they still need to get the 12th sword. However, Togame informs him that getting the 12th sword is going to be the easiest part of their plan because she recalls that Princess Hide has always been very proactive when it came to the gathering of the swords, so she believes that she must have the 12th one hidden somewhere near her, so all they would need to do is take it from her. Gradually, their sword's hunting journey is coming to an end, so Togame asks whether he would still stay by her side even after the hunt is over. She wants him to be her trusted partner because she believes that the road after the sword hunt is going to be much tougher, which is why she needs his power. Shichika is shocked to hear this because he is the son of the man who killed her father, so it's natural to assume that she wouldn't want to see him after this. However, Togame doesn't hold any grudge against him because it was his father who did the deed and not him, so any grudge she held against the Kyotoryu clan died along with her father. Shichika is very happy to hear this because he doesn't have a family anymore, he doesn't have anywhere else to return to. Then after this agreement is made, they both head for the city of Iga. Meanwhile, Penguin has just woken up and is surprised to find out that Togame hasn't killed him or even broken his legs, after which he decides to get going. Before he can leave, Emonzaemon walks into the room with the last Shikazaki blade known as Entoju, which is actually just a gun. Without wasting any time, he takes a shot, but Penguin uses his Ninpo technique to cause Emonzaemon to miss him. Now to follow up with the fence, he pulls out a ball called Juku, which is meant to bounce all over the room with increasing velocity until Emonzaemon can't dodge it anymore. However, Emonzaemon can use the Juku to his advantage by shooting a bullet to ricochet off it and hit Penguin right in the stomach. Now as he lies on the floor, Penguin starts to beg for mercy, but Emonzaemon chooses to be ruthless, so he kills him with the gun. Simultaneously, the duo arrive at the new Maniwa village to see it in a state of chaos with the area littered with corpses, all including women and children. This was reported to be the doing of Maniwa Ho, who they see sitting on a large section of rubble. It appears that since Maniwa Ho has touched the Dokudo Meki sword, his body has been possessed by the spirit of Shikazaki himself. After they speak for a while, Shikazaki admits that he had intentionally left Penguin on the road to serve as a messenger for them to come and find him, but what Togame doesn't understand is how he knew that they would be passing at that time. Shikazaki understands their confusion, so he explains that he and his entire clan are soothsayers, so with that, he claims to have predicted that they would be there by that time. Shichika hears this and doesn't believe that, rather he thinks that he has just made a guess and got lucky with it. In an attempt to make them believe him, he tells them that he created all the 1,000 unique blades by reverse importing production techniques that he learned by looking into the future. Togame now believes that he's a soothsayer who can predict the future, and frankly, she isn't that shocked by it because that is the only possible explanation for the existence of the swords. After all, the Shikazaki blades are all just regular Japanese swords that defy the laws of physics and psychology. Shikazaki's major motive for doing all his unending desire is to alter history to overthrow the shogunate. All in all, the negotiation tactic has failed, so Shichika has no choice but to battle it out. The fight begins and Shikazaki proves to be an equal match against him. However, Shichika unleashes his optimized technique on him, which he uses to defeat Shikazaki and claim the Dokudo Meki. Now on their way out, they run into Emonzaemon, who first of all sarcastically congratulates them on their grave milestone, but after that, he brings out the Ento-Q gun and shoots Togame right in the stomach. Emonzaemon explains that he killed Togame as an order from Princess Hide, since she is the daughter of the leader of the last rebellion whose real name is Princess Yosha. Emonzaemon also adds that this result of the battle between Togame and the princess is all Shichika's fault because she wouldn't have died if he hadn't agreed to be her sword. Now that it has come to this, Emonzaemon has no reason to fight Shichika, which is why he showed some pity by not targeting Togame's vital organs. She is still going to die, but not immediately, granting Shichika one last chance to speak with her. As Emonzaemon leaves, Togame speaks up and tells Shichika that she is fine with dying this way because she knows how selfish and egocentric she truly is. Even though Shichika sees that to be true, he still doesn't want her to die, so he starts to look for a solution, but unfortunately, there's nothing that can be done. As a last wish, she asks Shichika to ensure that her catchphrase is normalized by coming generations. She thanks Shichika for giving her the best time of her life. This past year they've been together. She is even happy that he didn't get killed, so he is now free to live his life as he wishes. She coughs up some blood, signifying that her time is almost up, but before she dies, she bluntly tells Shichika that this was a good thing for him because after the sword collection journey, she was going to kill him. His father had killed her father, so with him being her enemy's son, it was something that she just couldn't forgive. All the emotions she showed during this past year have all been fake, so her death would only be doing him a favor. Shortly after she delivers her last words, she peacefully dies from blood loss. A couple of days later, Shichika goes to the city of Owari to get his revenge on Princess Hite and Emonzeiman for killing Togame. Apparently, Shikizaki had already predicted his arrival, meaning that his appearance plays a vital role in the master plan. Before he gets to Princess Hite, she armed 12 soldiers with each of the unique swords to try and stop Shichika before he can get to her. They believe that Shichika has come to avenge his master Togame, but in reality, he's so tired of life that he has rather come there to die. Now that he is free to break the swords, he can easily destroy and defeat all the 12 sword wielders until he reaches Emonzeiman. During their battle, Emonzeiman is marveled at Shichika's immense strength, which has now been unlocked since he has no one left to take orders from. While sustaining numerous injuries, Emonzeiman has now been killed by Shichika using his optimized ultimate technique. After this, he goes upstairs to see Princess Hide having a conversation with the shogunate, who is the mastermind behind all of this. But Hide has been planning to bring down the shogunate from the start. After all, the Yaneri shogunate was never meant to come to power in the first place. In any case, Heidi's wish has always been to kill him, and now she can finally see that wish come true. Shichika knows killing the shogunate won't change anything for Togame at this point, and it won't make him feel any better either. But no chance in hell he's letting the shogunate live after what he has done. The shogunate pleads for mercy and even offers to give Shichika a country if he spares him. But Shichika has only one thing on his mind, and that's to end the shogunate, so he strikes him with such power that it blows a hole through the back wall. After everything is settled down, Shichika heads to a food stall to have a quiet moment to himself. But then Heidi shows up, so the quiet moment is ruined. She asks him what he intends to do now, and Shichika isn't sure yet. But since he has seen most of Noto already, he's thinking of moving to Kaga for a change of scenery. Heidi tells him that Kaga is a pretty rich area, so a broke guy like him might want to work on his finances before moving there. But Shichika just says he will let Heidi solve the money issues. If she's going to be following him around anyway, that's the least she can do, and in exchange, if they get attacked by bandits, he says he will protect her. So the two of them continue their journey across Japan.